Fra Giovanni was a true Renaissance man, a Franciscan friar, an engineer, an architect, a classical scholar. But today he is best remembered for the letter that he wrote to his friend, the Countess Alehia Aldo Brandeschi, on Christmas Eve in the year 1513. There is nothing I can give you which you have not. But there is much, very much, that while I cannot give it, you can take. No heaven can come to us unless we find our hearts and rest in it today. Take heaven. No peace lies in the future which is not hidden inside this present moment. Take peace. The gloom of the world is but a shadow. Behind it, yet within our reach, is joy. There's radiance, glory in the darkness if we could but see. And to see, we have only to look. I beseech you to look. Life is so full of meaning and purpose, so full of beauty beneath its covering, that you'll find earth but cloaks your heaven. Courage then to claim it, that's all. But courage you have, and the knowledge that we are pilgrims together, wending through an unknown country home. I didn't even know that this was Cookie Sunday. This morning's reading is from Rachel Naomi Remen, who's an MD, an oncologist who writes about the lessons she has learned working with cancer patients. Her book is called Kitchen Table Wisdom, and this particular essay is titled Eating the Cookie. One of my patients, a successful businessman, tells me that before his cancer, he would become depressed unless things went a certain way. Happiness was having the cookie. If you had the cookie, things were good. If you didn't have the cookie, life was not worth a damn. Unfortunately, the cookie kept changing. Sometimes it was money, sometimes power, sometimes sex. At other times it was a new car, a bigger contract, the most prestigious address. A year and a half after his diagnosis with prostate cancer, he sits shaking his head ruefully. It's like I stopped learning how to live after I was a kid. When I give my son a cookie, he's happy. And if I take it away or it breaks, he's unhappy. But he is 2.5 years old and I'm 43. It's taken me this long to understand that the cookie will never make me happy for long. The minute you have the cookie, it starts to crumble, or you start to worry about it crumbling, or someone trying to take it away from you, You have to give up a lot of things to take care of that cookie, to keep it from crumbling and be sure no one's going to take it from you. You may not even get a chance to eat it because you're so busy just trying not to lose it. Having the cookie is not what life is about. My patient laughs and says cancer has changed him. For the first time, he's happy. No matter if his business is doing well or not, no matter if he wins or loses at golf. 2 years ago, cancer asked me, okay, what's important? What is really important? Well, life is important. Life any way you can have it. Life with the cookie, life without the cookie. Happiness does not have anything to do with the cookie. It has to do with being alive. Before, who made the time? And he pauses thoughtfully. Damn, I guess life is the cookie. If happiness could be found in advice columns, most of us would be ecstatic. And there's no lack of self-help experts telling us how to get the love we want, how to avoid our erroneous zones, how to pull our own strings. It's a complete package. But the answers that work for them, they may or may not work for you. And those of you who came this morning lured in by the sermon title, How to Be Happy, if you were looking for a shortcut to serenity, I'm sorry. You may leave even unhappier than when you walked through the door. In fact, there's a little agreement on what happiness even means or how to measure it. Way back in 1972, the king of the little Himalayan country of Bhutan suggested that gross national happiness might be a better yardstick of personal well-being than the gross national product that occupies the economists. Because, every time there's a car wreck or a coronary, the GNP goes up while people's actual misery increases. Since then, the United Nations has been trying to do an annual ranking of nations using some other indicators, personal income, but also generosity, trust in institutions, freedom to make life choices, other social goods. Typically, Finland comes out at the top of the list of the happiest nations on earth. And Finland also happens to lead the world in suicides per capita, which leads some researchers to question, what are the criteria that really matter? For instance, does higher education, does learning lead to happiness, or is ignorance sometimes bliss? Is the city mouse or the country mouse more satisfied with life's pace and variety, or is it impossible to generalize about rodents or people, so that happiness is more a personal matter of preference and taste and philosophy than any set of outward circumstances? Because not everybody wants to live in Finland. Not everybody wants to live in Bhutan, especially not if you're Nepalese or Hindu who've been expelled in mass from that Shangri-La. Not everybody wants to live next door in Utah, which is supposedly the second happiest state in the Union. During this season, as Eileen mentioned, there's tremendous pressure to be happy. 'Tis the season to be jolly. There's sleigh bells tinkling in the snow, but it is a moody time for many of us. It's a family time when many of us are thinking about family members who we loved and lost. Several people spoke in our joys and sorrows about friends who are at or near or beyond the end of life. It's a time of childhood reminiscence, when growing up and adolescence weren't always the best years of our lives. It's a season for excess, when a lot of us are tempted to eat too much, or drink too much, or spend too much in hopes that just one more swipe of the credit card is going to yield the merriment that we want. Seasonal affective disorder is a real thing, according to the National Institutes of Mental Health, and selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors can be used to treat it. Although, personally, I think some of these drugs are just ways for big pharma to make a buck out of the fact that people feel blue sometimes, which is why Dory and I, moved out to New Mexico to get away from the damp and the dark and the cold of New England, even if there's a pill for that. Because it's my belief that so far nobody has managed to put happiness in a bottle, although a lot of people have looked for happiness in bottles. Nobody's managed to patent it in pill form. Nobody's even been able to put it on a bun. Nobody who watches the evening news can be elated all the time. Chronic cheerfulness would be hard to justify. And yet, despite that, this is not a bad world either. We're not really living in Plato's cave, or we're not really living in the kind of zombie apocalypse movies that seem to be coming out of Hollywood and Netflix these days. Just this morning I looked out and there was a northern flicker on the elm tree out our window. And maybe that's enough. You don't have to have maybe a happy life or a happy nation or a happy world. Just some mellow, flickering moments could be sufficient. But unfortunately, we live in a grievance culture. The message has been reinforced and drilled into many of us that I have been wronged, I have been injured, something bad has happened to me, and therefore somebody has to pay. This is reinforced by the litigation lawyers, and we see their billboards as we drive up here to Taos. You're hurting, you'd better call Saul. And there are people who are hurting in this world who have been systematically mistreated, and they do need to stand up for their rights and demand redress. They deserve that. But it also doesn't help to walk around with a perpetual chip on your shoulder either. If you have been hurt or injured or abused, don't let your tormentors define who you are or determine your destiny, because living well really is the best revenge. And if you're like most people, you would like to enjoy some little modicum of happiness, some little portion of satisfaction in this world. And it's not too much. It's not too much to ask a religious tradition like ours for some clues about where to find it. So, some of these things may seem obvious, but bear repeating anyway. And one such truth is that money doesn't buy happiness. The National Opinion Research Center has been tracking the mood swings of the American people since 1960. How many people are okay with their lives and how many are malcontent. And during that time, the GNP has tripled. People have bigger homes, they own more cars, they have far more gadgets than they did 2 generations ago. They consume more fast food and have more bypasses because of all those happy meals. But just about the same percentage of people today say they're generally pleased with life as they did before Amazon or cell phones existed. About a third of Americans say things are going pretty well. 2/3 are disgruntled most of the time. So money, material goods, these things, they matter. Nobody denies that, but they're not the crucial ingredient in the secret recipe. And this suggests another obvious truth, that too many of us spend too much time and energy worrying that somebody somewhere might be having more fun than we are. They might be healthier or wealthier or having better orgasms. Now we call this FOMO. It's the fear of missing out. But it used to have a much simpler, old-fashioned name: envy, jealousy. Envy as much as greed is a national pastime. Most Americans seem to imagine that their neighbors are having a lot more fun than actually seems to be the case, mistaking movies and magazines for real life. They suppose that carefree singles and swinging couples are making the scene in a liberated lifestyle of constant pleasure, and Mr. and Mrs. Joe Average are a little worried that their own experiences between the sheets may be a little humdrum. But in their comprehensive study on sex in America, 2 researchers, John Gagnon and I'm missing the other researcher's name. What they found in this massive study, thousands of people, those who say that they are overall happy with life tend to be also fairly happy with their sex lives. And those who said that they're happy with their sex lives also tended to have just one partner and also tended to be faithful to that one partner. So according to their very well-established research, boring turns out to be boffo. And just average is well above average, at least in our intimate relationships. Familiarity and fidelity seem to breed content. And it's also important to note that this is true for women as well as for men. Back in the 70s, there was some research that women tended to be more depressed than men, particularly if they were married, which was chalked up to the patriarchal nature of matrimony. But more recent studies show that when it comes to marital happiness, wedded bliss, Both sexes have about an equal shot. It doesn't matter if you're in a gay marriage or a heterosexual union. Things are going pretty well, and it seems like the founders had it about right 200 years ago, that when it comes to the pursuit of happiness, all people are created equal. It's not a matter of having the Y chromosome, or it's not a matter of having the proper toilet training as a child. It's not a case of circumstances that are completely beyond our control. To a large extent, it's a result of choices that we make. It's not just a passing mood or a gift of a lucky disposition, but it's a spiritual and ethical and moral attainment. Rene Dubos hints as much when he says that happiness is contagious, and for this reason, its expression is a social service, almost a duty. The Buddhists have a saying about this virtue: only happy people can make a happy world. And Buddhism isn't the only faith tradition to suggest that happiness is a moral imperative. This is the day the Lord has made, we read in the Psalms, and then the positive commandment, rejoice, be glad in it, saying that we have an obligation to be happy. Kind of takes the fun out of it, doesn't it? But it's just another way of saying that it would really be a waste. It would really be a sin. It would really be a pity to spend our whole lives complaining or feeling sorry for ourselves, because we do have options. We have alternatives for how we can carry ourselves in this world. I noticed this recently. I was walking down a bike path and just had this perception that about half the people who were walking by seemed to be smiling and happy with the world, and no wonder, because it was a beautiful sunny day, and the leaves were brilliant and the sun was shining. But about half the people that walked by seemed to be frowning. They not just frowning, they were wearing expressions of irritability and woe that seemed to have been carved into their faces, probably etched into their psyches. All of these people were walking down the same trail on the same day, occupying roughly the same point in the fabric of space and time, but you might have thought that half of them were taking the road to heaven and the others were walking straight to hell, and you wouldn't be far wrong. Our spiritual forebearers understood this very well. The early Universalists believed that the purpose of religion was not just to make people good, because that's kind of boring. It was also to make them happy. And goodness and happiness were inseparable in their minds. You remember that the Universalists rejected the whole idea of punishment or retribution in an afterlife. What they thought was that people are not punished for their sins. What happens is they're punished by their sins. Things like envy and greed and spite and pettiness and anger or wrath, as it used to be called. You know, if you're feeling wrathful all the time, you're not a happy person. These are things that tend to pucker the heart and to sour the soul. And by the same token, acts of kindness and compassion and forgiveness and charity and patience, all these things are like the sweetener in life's lemonade. Well-being is an extension of well-doing, and our reward isn't waiting for us in some world to come when we die. It's here and now. It's within us and among us. Happiness is the state of being in right relation with ourselves, with other people, with our universe. So that's the message. Don't worry that someone might be having a better time than you are. Instead, hug someone you love. Grin for no good reason. Sing when no one's listening. Do a good deed when nobody's watching. Take joy. Don't worry that the gingerbread men aren't going to get cooked this Christmas. Don't worry if the challah is overdone. Whether your tradition is fruitcake or stollen, it doesn't matter, because if you think that you need the cookie to be happy, you're mistaken. Whether the cookie means more money or tighter abs or the latest iPhone, you're going to be disappointed, because life is the Christmas cookie. And enjoying it is the answer.